bit more directly into the digital economy would be more interesting to the group. I will lightly cover some UN developments, but not significantly, because I think it's the digital economy work that is probably of more interest to this group. But I will focus. I promise that this will not be a huge discussion on Pillar 2, because I'm sure you're bored to death of that. I'll try and do is something that you probably hear less of, which is what the UN work is around and how that applies. So I try and bring the different strands of my rather complex life into this presentation, which is around how governments are adapting, especially governments in developing countries, because that's where I work most of the time, essentially for the World Bank and for UNDP and other agencies. So here's something on the background. Again, I'm not going to read through everything on the slide. I'm sure they will share the deck with you. But just to think about, what are the tax policy developments that we see, the global financial crisis and the pandemic, what are the broader fiscal challenges that governments face. And having come from the profession, I know that we are very focused on delivering for our clients, for working on the client's problems. But on the other side of my life, which is less of what tax professionals see on a regular basis, is the broader fiscal management. And the broader fiscal management issues are around increased government spending and borrowing, interest rates going up, the inflation pressures this time around, which are more about supply chain dislocations. And there is a fair amount of evidence to show that some of these dislocations are going to be systemic, but particularly US policy of friendshoring, as it's called, to have less reliance on China, means fragmentation of global supply chains. So I know this is not what, day to day we as tax professionals are interested in, but these are all issues that affect tax policy, and that's why I'm kind of raising that right now, and that creates the challenges in the tax governance context, which is the diminishing low tax GDP ratios, especially in developing countries. Resource development, the dependent developing countries have seen a recent uptick because of commodity prices. But during the pandemic, they went into a trough and had significant expenditures, which they can't cover. You have external context around the policy environment where you have agencies and NGOs that are pushing a tax justice agenda, which is pushing for greater tax transparency, improved compliance from multinationals, more focus on multinational tax avoidance. The third, and probably more important for developing countries, the huge financing needs for the sustainable development goals, which have a significant environmental impact. So I know this is very, very big picture, but it is the context in which we as tax professionals operate. So my question to you, to this group, and broadly, is how do practitioners provide good, relevant advice that responds to these challenges, recognizes these challenges, but also leverages some of the trends that we see? So that's essentially what I will try and focus on. I'm just conscious of time, so I don't want to overshoot. This is something about the UN work. So the UN transfer pricing manual can be seen as a particular step change in the way that the UN has been used essentially by developing countries, because at the end of the day, the UN is simply an organization of its member states. But developing countries have used the UN process, and India and China have been key players along with Brazil in that process of asserting a stronger role outside of the OECD in the global tax policy process. What you have is, for a long time, the UN Tax Committee primarily focused on treaty work, basically the UN model. And the UN model, as we all know, is really a reflection of the OECD model with some changes. But that was the focus of the UN Tax Committee for decades. And what you saw with the forming the separate subcommittee on transfer pricing in October 2009, and I've been fortunate enough to have been a part of that process from the very beginning, has been that there's been um, a change in the way the UN has operated, the UN tax work has operated, and that action continues today. So again, I'm not going to go through all the steps, but you'll see that that the US and UK in particular strongly resisted that expansion, and that continues today. Even today, the developed countries constantly try and push back from the UN, asserting more of a development role, and that tension exists. Um, what you find is that you have also this external driver in civil society actors like Tax Justice Network, who are pushing a very expansive tax agenda. And if you listen to Tax Justice Network, they will say that the current tax environment that we see, country by country reporting, automatic exchange of information. So they say it's ABC, automatic exchange of information. The B is base erosion and profit shifting, I think, and the C is country by country reporting. So they say that these are things that they have been driving and have now become mainstream. So it's necessary, I think, as practitioners to understand that process and where it's playing out. So the next stage of that was initiated last November. Again, apologies to people who are already on top of these subjects, but many practitioners are not. So I'm just kind of sharing this. Last November, you had the General Assembly resolution about the UN taking a more direct role in taxation, and there are some voices that are talking of a separate UN tax agency. That's probably not likely to happen, but it's worth staying on top of. So here's what the UN work has been around. There's a whole range after the transfer pricing subcommittee. There's a whole range of new work streams. Some subcommittees have been formed, one of which was the tax consequences of the digital economy. Um, you are probably aware of the UN transfer pricing manual. I at the end of it, I'll probably stand up and share a copy of it, at least the image of it. I'm sure you can find it. The third edition, it has been out. It's unlikely that there will be a fourth edition as such, but there will be some updates published online. And I've been fortunate enough to have been the editor for all three editions. We have also the UN digital economy proposals, very much a treaty-based approach. To my mind, and maybe I speak from a biased position, but definitely to my mind, a much simpler approach based on the treaty, which is the Article 12B. And then there are approaches to both a net taxation and a gross taxation and And then there are ways to relieve that. There is what's called a CRP, a conference room paper on that, done by Philip Baker, KC, who's a very famous tax barrister in the UK, which is the form of an MLI, a multilateral instrument that countries will sign on. But that's not yet approved, so I'm not sharing that but that's the approach that's being discussed as an alternative to the more complex Pillar 1 approach. So I just offered that as kind of an update. There's some other UN work, and I won't go into too much of this, but there are some steps. I'll mention a couple. Something about, there's some additional work to be done at on the Article 12.3 approach on user rights for software. So to use user rights as royalties, to address them as royalties. Another area that US practitioners might be interested in seeing is Article 12A, which went into the 27 update of the UN Model Convention. And this is a significant departure from the OECD model, which is about technical service fees, and technical service fees are defined very broadly. And there are some significant nexus issues around PE treatment, particularly service fees, and the way Article 12A operates. So there are some kinks in the system that have to be worked out. But what you're already seeing, and we see this in my software work, we're seeing Article 12A being utilized now in treaty negotiations, and you will see more and more of this kind of Article 12A work. So I guess the conclusion that I would draw, moving from that very big picture of the global economy down to where we are in terms of tax policy, we were what David Spencer has called from a centrifugal approach, where the OECD is the centerpiece and everything revolves around that, to what in physics is called the centripetal. So there are multiple centers of tax policy, or multiple fora of tax policy discussion, and what you will see are messy compromises between those. So moving on to Pillar 2, which is the big issue that everybody is discussing. I won't again go into what Pillar 2 does. I'm sure everybody knows everything about Pillar 2, so I'm not going to go through the description, but talk about where Pillar 2 comes in for developing countries, which is exactly where I work. So basically, there was always a concern that will Pillar 2 and also BEPS 1, Action 5, how will this affect incentives? So if you have clients who have businesses in developing countries, if they have incentives, how does that apply? And how will Pillar 2 actually apply for developing countries? So the context for that is a question of domestic resource mobilization, which, as we saw from the opening slide, is a concern. I mean, even in developed countries, here in the US, people are beginning to talk about, there's this huge fiscal gap that is opening up year on year, and more countries are approaching that point where national debt has reached or is exceeding 100% of GDP. So, something will have to be done, and fiscal measures, it's a dangerous thing to say, but monetarism may have reached its limits, and we may be back to fiscal measures in terms of macro management. So what you will see is, countries trying to get revenue raised through different forms, and Pillar 2 will play a part in that. And the core issue is that incentives will still be around, but they will be affected by Pillar 2, and that's the one area that I will kind of go and focus on. So the challenges that most developing countries face is that yeah, unlike a lot of OECD countries, there is still very significant reliance on corporate income tax. And there are many countries that have an effective tax rate because of the way incentives have been applied to attract foreign direct investment. The effective tax rate drops below 15%. So bear in mind that this is going to be broader. It's just not digital economy. It will affect all market-facing economy businesses. So what I wanted to show you is, the actual, well, until now this has been very theoretical. Now we move into the real world. And this is a forecast of what global implementation will look like in the Asia Pacific region, which, as we know, is one of the most dynamic parts of the world economy. So you can see just from the image, and again, I'm not going to get into the detail. I mean, we could spend a whole hour just talking through specific provisions in specific countries, and I'm involved at country level in some of these places. So I would actually have a slight conflict in explaining what is going on. But generally speaking, you can see just from the image that it's going to be very different from country to country. And here's kind of a split between the process and the timelines. How it's going to work. So Korea and Japan are front runners. As you would expect, the other OECD countries, Australia and New Zealand, are nearly there. Malaysia is already in drafting stage. Indonesia is a little bit behind. It's maybe it'll be 2024. It depends on the state speech this year. And then you can see that others are kind of tracking. And whether India will implement in full, or whether India will apply the DST in a different way, we're still, the jury is out on that, and it all depends. So again, we could spend a whole day just talking about specific how one country applies it, but I just want to throw at this very, very high level the practical implementation issues for Pillar 2 at a country level, which is that you're going to have a jurisdiction level kind of question. You're going to have an entity level kind of question. So jurisdiction level will have the question of what is the baseline CIT system, what is the rest of the international provision. Not every country has a set of CFC rules. So this may be a way, a different set, a different form of CFC is what we are looking at. Some countries will not even have a full-fledged transfer pricing regime, or they may have a transfer pricing regime that is only there in theory. So you're going to have that kind of jurisdiction level legislation and so forth. Then at the entity level, that is really, your client's entity structure. How is that entity structure organized? If the client is in the fast-moving consumer goods business, have they really focused on limited risk distributors? And will that change? Will Pillar 2 now mean that it doesn't make that much sense from a tax standpoint to have limited risk distributors? If you have a contract manufacturer, if you have a captive manufacturer, manufacturing subsidiary that is buying in a range of services, what does that affect you? How does that affect you? And that question comes next to incentives. What tax incentives does that local sub enjoy? And once implementation of Pillar 2 happens, and this is where the entity structure comes in, if you have RHQ in between, and then you have the corporate headquarters or the group holding company, and then service firms elsewhere, what does that relationship mean? And the essential problem when we get down to the detail will be that there is no one size fits all. There will not be a one solution. So there's much more information awareness needed. I won't go into this into depth because we're running out of time. Same thing, I was going to go through the QDMTT and the benefits of it, but I'm aware that we are already halfway through, and I do want to run through. I promise it'll be very quick. It's a very busy slide, but what I wanted to show you was we've talked until now about the policy piece, but that policy is nothing if it's not implemented. And tax administrations are also changing. While the policy context is changing, what I want to get across is that tax administrations and customs administrations are changing very radically through digital transformation. So again, I'm not going to go through all the detail, but you can see an image. You had on the left-hand side, the past or the current status, very, whether it's forms driven, it's math work, it's done, it's a desk work, and it's largely manual. And there is a significant amount of subjectivity in here. There are desktop-based kind of analysis tools. And what you're looking at is very much a systemic, a structured approach, a data-driven type of approach. And what you're seeing are countries bringing all their tax administration systems into one place through what's called an ITMS, an integrated tax management system. So that kind of silo approach. So you're going to find information that was in other parts of government, feeding more and more into the kind of tax equation and the tax compliance mix. And that will change the way we as tax professionals operate. So here's another view. This is the way that many tax administrations are approaching that in the direction of like predictive modeling and kind of trying to see what is going to happen next rather than what has already happened. We have always, at least I'm old enough to remember when we used to work, like a year behind because the tax return had to be filed before you could do audits and investigations. And now you're doing predictive analysis and you're trying to, from a tax administration standpoint, you're trying to address problems before they arise. And where does that come in for transfer pricing, especially in developing countries? What you're seeing is increased implementation of automated case selection that leverage third-party data and will soon be leveraging AUI data. So in this kind of data-heavy world, how do we operate? So that's what I wanted to show you here is what is the trend in tax administration. And what you're seeing are these digital development stages. Many developing countries are maybe in level 2 and level 3, but they are aware of all the way up to level 6. And there are initiatives like India with the universal, what's called the public infrastructure or the universal public data infrastructure. There are countries that are trying to leapfrog into level 5 and level 6 from level 2. So these are things to be aware of. And again, I'm just trying to give you an advanced view of what the world is like. And here's the conclusions that I want to draw to answer the questions I posed at the start. And I'm sorry for going a little bit beyond my time, but the tax governance needs to be in the context of the globalized digital economy. So countries need to collect more tax, but they'll try to maintain investment environment. What you're going to see is that some low-hanging fruit will be targeted. What you're going to see is possibly, this is an approach that is possible that for many developing countries, it might be easier to go for digitalized economy transactions just from a VAT indirect kind of tax. So you have a destination principle. Wherever the supply is consumed or paid for is where the income arises. So that is very different from residence-based tax systems, and you're going to see tensions between those. And what you're going to see is tax administration, that last slide I showed, tax administrations leveraging those technology trends. So what do we do as advisory firms and practices? We have to recognize that developing countries will use both even normative models, that the OECD will no longer provide the only source of advice, and this will apply more and more to transfer pricing as guidance gets better. And it won't be just the UN. You will see regional organizations like ATAF, the African Tax Administration Forum, and things like that, who will develop guidance and will have much more context-specific transfer pricing guidance. What you're going to understand is we all know that we live in the world of services. And if we use transactional models, we will need to have better ways of identifying and managing services for on a cross-border basis. You will have to think about technology, and where that those technology leapfrogs will happen quickly, and what can we as professionals do to be better interconnected ourselves, connect better with our clients, and connect better with tax administration. So there will always be that professional tension, where you're trying to provide best advice, but at the same time, there will be a need, in my view, to be better integrated with tax administration processes, so that it's not so confrontational, and that we have to do our job in a different way in this digital world. So this is the last slide, I promise. This is what I wanted. This is where I see the future, that you will have deeper use of tax technology in business. You will see, and this is a Pillar 2 simulation, which is essentially where you have a corporate org chart, and I'm not going to do a technology demo. You have a corporate org chart, and you want to do a Pillar 2 simulation of the entities in yellow. You identify those swim lanes, and you get that book to tax differential. So this kind of advanced information is where we need to be. And what we will end up with is something like, sorry, this is the last slide, a mutually beneficial partnership where tax administration and business will leverage technology. I'm not going to go through the slide details. So sorry about that. I think I went a little bit beyond, but I thought I'd kind of share some ideas that maybe you don't come across on a daily basis. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hafiz, for your